Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say, staying happy and healthy and all that good stuff. And in this video, I have even more encounters and just a lot of scary stuff to tell you about. So if that sounds like something that you like, definitely pull up a stump with me and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. This happened around October in the year 2002. I was in my room playing video games and jamming out with some clanmates on SOCOM, US Navy SEALs on the PS2. It was around 11 o'clock at night. Suddenly, I heard lots of commotion outside. The horses are going crazy, absolutely ape, out in the corral, running around in a panic. I go out to see just what the hell's going on. I figure maybe it's a mountain lion or a bear that's nearby that's freaking them out. But I go out and there doesn't seem to be any signs of anything, or at least anything I can see. But the horses are still just panicking. One of them straight up busts through a barbed wire fence, cutting their chest open, just to escape from whatever the heck is out there. I go wake up my parents. They get dressed and we all go outside to investigate. There's noises coming from the nearby hillside that's near our house. There's definitely something up there. My parents grab an old Colt New Frontier .22 revolver and head towards the base of the hill. Something huge is stomping through the fallen leaves, pushing over full trees. I suggest shooting a few rounds into the darkness to scare off whatever it is. And as soon as I get that out of my mouth, I'm met by the loudest, most inhuman roar I have ever heard in my entire life. Now, I had heard stories about Bigfoot and stuff in the hills, but I never really believed them. I kinda thought they were all just a joke. But off in the distance, I hear more roars coming from farther back in the hills, and I think, oh crap, there's more of them. The thing stomps off through the brush without further incident. Eventually, the horses quiet down and things go back to normal. And it turns out that where I live is a hotbed for Bigfoot activity. An investigator told me that there seems to be a community of 20 to 30 of them in the area. They don't post many of the reports because they don't want people to start going out into the woods hunting for them. This happened back when I was 17. It was about 2009, 2010. I used to live with my folks way out in the middle of nowhere. Basically, if you're wondering how in the middle of nowhere it was an hour drive just for me to go to school. So I was hanging out at a friend's house one night, and I had to go back home instead of just passing out there. I don't remember why though. So I'm driving home, and I want to say I was about 15 minutes away from my house. The only other home in the area is this white 3-story Victorian-style house that I had never noticed anything creepy about besides the fact that it was a Victorian house in Florida, and there was never any cars in the driveway. There are so few people nearby that our mailbox is 15 miles away. It's like an apartment mailbox in the middle of nowhere, and it happens to be about 100 feet away from that house. My mom sends me a text asking me to pick up the mail on the way home. I stopped there at about 3 o'clock in the morning to get the mail in the spooky woods. The only thing lighting the way is a single street lamp. As soon as I get out of my car, I get this weird feeling. The air gets cold almost. I hustle to get the mail, and I get back in my car. I turn on the corner that this Victorian house is on, and I get a cold shiver down my spine. Something is terribly wrong. I even well up a bit and almost start crying and shaking for no reason. Then, for just a flash of a second, my headlights catch something. They reflect off this pale white humanoid in front of my car, It almost seems like it's wearing some kind of gown. Just as my car is getting close to it, it sprints off into the trees. Now, as expected after this, I'm freaked out and I'm speeding to try and get to my house. I make the 15-minute drive an 8-minute drive. I lived in a mother-in-law suite on my parents' property. It was really awesome for having friends over on rare occasions and smoking and drinking and stuff, but this place was about a quarter mile from my actual parents' house. We had a bunch of property. I pull into the driveway and run to the mother-in-law suite. I lock my door and I sit my ass down and start typing about what I saw. I put on some music and I text a friend to just try to laugh it off and feel better. All of a sudden, my speakers start crackling and popping like they never had before. I check it and the connections are fine, so I try not to get carried away. Then suddenly, there's a banging on my front door. A loud bam, 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 bam. I'm a little scaredy cat, so I get under my covers. It only banged those times. I just try to convince myself that it's a tree limb that's hanging down and hitting my window. Then, the following morning, I get a call at 8 a.m. It's my dad. I answer it. He says, "Do not go outside." I am immediately awake and I'm spooked again. He said, "There's something sitting outside of your front door." I look out my window. Lo and behold, there's the same thing from last night, pacing back and forth in front of my door. Eventually, my dad comes around with a shotgun. He fires off a round in its direction, and it runs off. And I never saw it again. It's not the most intriguing thing or thematic, but it scared the hell out of me. I'm a medic with the Air Mobile Brigade of the Netherlands. I make good money, and I decided to try and make my dreams of flying come true, because I initially tried out for a helicopter pilot. I joined an aero club stationed out of an old naval airfield, and this is what happened one time. So this particular time, I was the last one to leave the hangar. I unplug all the devices so they don't cause an electrical fire. Planes inside the hangar are really expensive, 100,000 plus. Later at night, I remembered not unplugging the water boiler, as everything the Aero Club owns, besides the planes, is old and they don't have automatic switches. I was staying with my parents for the weekend, so I decided to just drive back to the airfield in one go and then drive back home. I drive the car 5 kilometers around the runway. We never enter the runway unless we absolutely have to. There's no lights nearby because the airfield is no longer in use, so it's complete darkness, but the stars were always beautiful. The Aero Club are the only users in the airfield, and it's closed at night, like I said. I realize that I'm completely by myself, and there's not another person around for at least 2 kilometers. As I lock up the hangar after unplugging the water boiler, I heard moaning in the grass on the runway side. I yell out, "Hello? Is anyone out there?" I hear faint moans, like someone is in pain. I hear something like, help me." I freak out. I yell back, "Hang in there, I'm coming." In the moment I guessed that maybe it was a scavenger who took a bad fall. I get in my car and shine the headlights into the field surrounding the runway. I see maybe 30 to 50 people laying in the field, stretching their arms at me, begging with desperate eyes, all bleeding heavily through their clothing, and some out of their orifices. I freak out again. I grab my phone and dial 112, which is our country's version of 911, while I look back at the people. I realize that they're all wearing really old military uniforms, and the arms that are outstretched toward me are like a fog. I choke. I throw the phone on the passenger seat, and I race at 110 kilometers or so over that runway toward the gate and just leave the airfield. I felt so horrible too. Moving down that runway for 3 kilometers seemed to take ages. Seeing them laying in the grass looking at me, I remember screaming at them that I couldn't help them because they were all dead. I end up going back to my parents' house for a full day, and I can't even get out of bed. I feel so awful and sick. The history of that place is staggering, I found out later. It has been a military base in some form since the Roman times. It was where the Germans first invaded my country, and where the rookie kids with hardly any training had to fend off the German invasion, armed only with repeaters. They were killed in minutes. I didn't dream this. I was there. I even got a fine for prank calling the emergency services on my cell phone in the mail. I didn't fight the fine. I just paid it. When I was 7 years old, my mom left me for an aging bassist in this really terrible club hair metal band. A few years later, she ends up ODing on heroin. So after that, I was an only child. My dad raises me the best he can. We have no other family except an uncle that my dad refused to talk to, and one grandfather that was in a nursing home. When I was 14, my grandfather died. Dad and my uncle both inherit around $2 million apiece. My grandpa had a textile company that he sold a long time ago, if you're wondering where the money came from. Around that time, I saw my uncle because him and Dad had to get all the affairs in order with Grandpa's situation. He's glad to see me. We talk and catch up a bit. My dad still hates his guts, but he never says why. He just mumbles under his breath as he changes the subject or pretends he needs to go do something around the house. So I stopped asking. But I did hear that my uncle did good with his money and started buying up land. So fast forward to when I was in high school. We found out that my dad had throat cancer. I was trying to be an optimist, but it really didn't look good. We had to use up a lot of the money on treatment. I even postponed going to college to stay with him, so he isn't alone. He ends up dying when I'm 21. I have a little under 10 grand and the house after all is said and done. I work crappy jobs here and there. I get a girlfriend, and then she cheats on me after 2 years. She lived with me, so I can't kick her out right away. I say screw it, and I'm taking an extended amount of time off from my job, and I drive off to get away from the situation. I had no one in my life, no one that I was close to me anyways. I was feeling very hopeless and depressed. I drove around aimlessly around the country. I hit some famous places, and along the way, I found the Grand Canyon and all that cool stuff. I see a bunch of tourists with their happy families, and I got really lonely. So, I decided to try and find my uncle. It takes a lot of searching, but eventually I do get the number of a guy that keeps an answering machine for my uncle. Apparently my uncle lives off-grid in a cabin by himself and doesn't keep a phone or anything there. Anyways, I didn't want to hang around and wait for a call back, so I decide to drive out to where he lives. I get to the guy's place who keeps my uncle's answering machine. It's an old retired guy. He's pretty friendly. He tells me that there isn't actually a road to my uncle's cabin, that there's only a trail through the woods. It's like 10 miles, so the guy lends me an old mountain bike and tells me that I can leave my car at his place. I get my bag with all my essentials, and I thank him, and then I head out. I start wondering on the drive there how my uncle will react to me just dropping in on him after so long. I get really nervous. I pass by a few ponds and small lakes. I couldn't believe that my uncle owned all this land. So I got to the cabin, and my uncle is outside, staring at me like a psycho. He seems really paranoid. I yell to him. I tell him it's me, and he lightens up quite a bit. He's super happy to see me. He hugs me and tells me, "You've grown so much. I didn't even recognize you." We get inside, and we start catching up. He makes some food for us. I tell him my situation, and he says that I can stay with him for a while. And this did make me feel good. It felt like I had somebody. The next day we just hung out. I saw that he has a ton of journals that he has been writing in every day since he was 10. My dad had some too, but he quit after a couple years. My uncle said that I could read them if I wanted to, if I didn't mind seeing some mildly questionable stuff. He was brutally honest when he wrote. I spent a lot of time reading those journals, learning more about my dad's family. Eventually, I want to get some stuff that my uncle didn't have in his cabin, mainly beer. In the morning, I go back to my car and head to the nearest place for some supplies, which ended up being a gas station. I get back and I'm ready to hit the trail again. The old man comes out and I talk to him a bit more. He asks me about my family history. I tell him that my dad and my uncle didn't get along. He tells me that it might have something to do with the lake disappearance. And my response is literally, "What? What disappearance?" Apparently, a long time ago, this area was a popular camping and canoeing spot. People would pay like a regular campground, and they would carry their canoes in there. My uncle used to live in a different spot, and he would come here every year when he was younger. The old guy tells me that one year, a dude disappeared there. His tent was all torn up, and there was blood everywhere. Only one other person on record was there at that time, and it was my uncle. There was an investigation and everything. My uncle was cleared eventually, and the dude was never found. I asked the dude what he thinks happened, and he said that he had no earthly idea, but I should just ask my uncle for his side of the story. This was really unnerving at the time. I figured that this is why my dad broke off contact with my uncle. So, I head back to my uncle's with the beer and the other goodies. Not gonna lie, hearing that story about my uncle changed my image of him. I decided not to bring it up immediately, but I really wanted to know what his story was. We drink beer and just hang out outside. I asked him if the next day if I could take the canoe. He says sure, but tells me to only go in specific spots. I don't bother asking why. He starts to make something for us to eat. I just sit there and I read more journals. I decided to try and find the journal for the year that the disappearance had happened. I start going through it when I get to a spot that had 5 pages ripped out. The way it looked, it seemed like my uncle had done it recently. All the other journals that I looked through had all their pages, so I was pretty sure he did this at some point after I took an interest in the journals. I decide not to bring it up though. We eat, we hang out some more, and we go to sleep. The next day, I want to head out in the canoe and paddle around a bit. He gives me some pointers and tells me to stay on this one side of the lake. I have no problem with that. I paddle around for a while, hugging the shore mostly. I hadn't been canoeing in quite a while, so I was kind of scared to go into the deeper water. Eventually, I lost sight of the cabin. It was a nice day though, lots of wildlife. I see this odd-looking area though, just offshore. There's a bunch of chopped down trees and it's really overgrown, but it looked like something used to be there. I decide to check it out and find out that it's an overgrown trail, and it looks like someone tried to cover it up with logs and debris to hide it. I'm too curious to leave it alone, of course. I get out and I walk through the thick vegetation. I follow what's left of the trail for about a quarter mile, and I come out to a different lake. It's dead quiet. There's no wind, no animal sounds, and no bugs. I get a super eerie feeling, like I'm definitely being watched here. I start walking out on the rocky shore, and I realize that it's way too quiet. Even the water seems to be not making any noise. I decide to go back to the canoe and head back to the cabin. My uncle is out and waves at me. He asks me how it was. I tell him it was fun. I ask him about the other lake. His face goes blank as he looks off in that direction. He says that he told me to not go to any other lakes. I tell him I just walked there. I didn't even take the canoe over. He tells me to never go there again, or I would have to leave. And then he changes it and tells me that he doesn't want me to go canoeing again. He's really pissed. And I say, okay, whatever. He disappears for a while. I decide to go get more beer. After some time, I get back to the cabin and my uncle still isn't there. I decide to hold off on the beer and make us something to eat. He gets back and he's pretty quiet. Things are very tense. I just end up sitting around till bedtime. The next day, though, he's in a better mood. He apologizes for being the way he was the night before. We start drinking beer. He ends up going through most of them himself, and he actually loosens up a lot. I guess he really needed to take the edge off. I ask him why him and Dad never got along. He just kind of brushes it off. I ask him if it's to do with the incident on the lake. He gets quiet, and then he asks me what I know about it. I tell him essentially what the old guy told me. He gets quiet for a really long time and just stares off in the direction of the lake with the overgrown trail. Maybe it's because he was drunk, or maybe it's because he was tired of keeping it to himself, but he told me where he hid the missing journal pages. He told me to make of it what I wanted, but what he wrote was the truth. He then got up and he went for a walk. I went to the spot in the cabin where he hid the pages and I started reading them. The first page is from the day before his trip. It didn't really have anything too interesting on it. It was mostly a list of things that he took with him on his camping trip, what he ate, the weather, and all that kind of stuff, which he documented every day anyways. The next 2 pages were from the same day. They were about him arriving at the park, hoping that he was the first person there that season so that he could camp wherever he wanted. He found out that there was already another guy out on the lakes who went in the night before. I guess back when the lane was a campground, it was a lot easier to access a lot of the areas, so it didn't take long to get to the lakes with his canoe. He had a specific lake that he liked to stay at, and he was hoping to have it all to himself, or at least it was his favorite spot, which was a small island in the lake. When he got onto the lake, he saw smoke on the island, a red tent, and that kind of stuff, so he was super disappointed that the spot he wanted was taken. Eventually, he found another small peninsula that had some trees on it. The only other noteworthy thing from that day was that he never saw the guy walking around on the island, and eventually, the smoke stopped. The last thing on the page was that my uncle had planned on moving to a different lake the next day because he just wanted to be completely alone. But there was a storm rolling in that day, and he decided to stay at the spot for one more night. He also wrote that during the night on his first day, he got up to go to the bathroom. The moon wasn't quite full, but it gave off a lot of light. He saw what looked like a log poking straight up in the middle of the lake. The last page, though, had 2 days on it, one on the front and one on the back. The weather was horrible the next day, windy and cloudy. He decided to try and head out anyways, but ended up flipping his canoe and had to get back to shore. He made a small fire and dried off all of his gear, and closed the best he could. He set up his tent again and was in for another night. He also wrote that he had still not seen any movement or a fire on that island, and the night before he once again saw the upright log on the lake, but this time it was closer, about half of the way between the first place he saw it and his campsite. He also noted that it was not visible during the day. From what I had read up to that point, I didn't understand what was so bad about this that he would try and hide it from me. That all changed when I read the last entry. The last night he was there, the moonlight woke him up, but also he had to go to the bathroom again. He got out of the tent into the cool night air to complete silence. The only sound was the faintest lapping of the water on the shore. As he was relieving himself, he noticed how calm and glassy the lake was, and then he saw it. The thing that he thought was a log now stood at the very end of the peninsula. Now that it was on land, he could tell that it was very much alive. A pitch-black figure that had to be at least 7 feet tall. He said it looked weird, like it was wearing wet robes or something in the darkness. He crawled back into his tent, his heart racing, and pretended like it wasn't there. Then he heard the voice of a child in distress. "Can you help me? I'm lost," followed by a low giggling and random whispers around the tent. "Shh, don't wake him." Then more giggling. This went on for what seemed like an eternity. The sounds of footsteps all around the tent, giggling and shushing. Just before dawn, he heard what he presumed to be the figure wading back out into the water. As soon as it was light out, he was already packing his things and heading back the way he came in. But first, he paddled up to the island to see if there was anybody there. All he saw were the remains of the first fire, the tent torn apart on one side, and blood everywhere. There were strange symbols drawn onto boulders. He reported the missing man, but he never told anyone about what he saw the night before. After I was done reading, I just sat there until my uncle got back from his walk. "It's still out there," he said, and looked towards the lake. He said that over the years he bought up the area, and he tries his best to keep people off of that lake. He says the whole thing is cursed. That didn't stop me from going back there once more to see it for myself, but that's a story for a different time. So, what'd you think of those encounters? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. Do you have one of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you want to. Also in the description is a PayPal and a Patreon if you want to donate to the channel that way. And with that, I think that I will say thank you for pulling up a stump. And, oh, actually, I have a funny story for you before we go. So the other week, I'm driving home from another city, which is about an hour or so away from where I live. And it's pretty much just a straight highway, so it's not too, difficult to drive at night. But it's a lot of wooded areas, so you kind of got to be on the lookout. Anyways, so I was pulling up to this area that's outside of another town, and I saw this thing on the road, and I was looking at it, and I was kind of getting freaked out by it because I couldn't tell what it was. It had no discernible shape. So I'm slowly following it with my car, and it's 10 o'clock at night. And then when I actually get up to it, it is the biggest raccoon that I have ever seen that has a garbage bag that's it's either dragging it or it's stuck to it. I don't know. But yeah, I just thought that was kind of funny. I got a good laugh at it at the time anyways. I think I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump, and you can like and subscribe if you want to, no pressure. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.